Yeah, do the. Taking refuge. Empty-handed, I entered the world. Barefoot, I leave it. My coming, my going, two simple happenings that God entangled. That was the Japanese poet Ryokan, one of my favorites, and I think Derek's as well. It was lived in the mid 1700s to the early 1800s. So welcome on what I think is a beautiful, beautiful Sunday morning. We're rapidly approaching the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. I heard rain is on the way. It will probably follow me to Bakersfield as I drive this afternoon over there. And then we looked ahead and Carla said, it'll probably follow us on Wednesday from Bakersfield to LA as well. So thank you for making the effort to be here, all you diehards. We were joking, but I was sure that I was just going to put up a mirror and be talking to myself. And yeah, and so thank you for being here. It's great. And I'm reminded, in fact, I wrote this quote down because when I was realizing, geez, everybody's out of town and there probably won't be many folks here. The piece that we read during the Hansoku Gyocha, which is the ritual presentation of the tea before Hosen. We always do this reading from Dogen, and it's from the Shobogenzo Zuimonki, where he is handing the baton, so to speak, off to his first Dharma successor. And the Dharma successor is going to be doing his first talk. So Dogen said, don't let the smallness of this assembly or the fact that this is his first lecture bother you. The group around Fengyang amounted to only 6 or 7 people. Yaoshan had less than 10 disciples under him, yet they all practiced the way of the Buddhas and the patriarchs. A time like this, they say, is when a monastery flourishes. So I guess we're flourishing. And I know I was talking to Eduardo yesterday. This also reminded me, well, I was preparing for another talk, actually at SLOZC, which I also had to reschedule. And it was going to be on the 38th Zen patriarch, Dongsheng Liangje. And he is really, really well known, and in fact was credited for founding the Chaodong school, which eventually becomes the Soto school. And he had disciples like between 500 and 1,000 disciples. He was the Dharma heir of Yu Yan, and this is a relatively unknown teacher. He's in the Denkoroku book, and you don't hear much about him at all. And the stories, when I did some research on it, he's really kind of considered a little slow, a little dense. And there was one of his teachers said, because he studied with a number of teachers. The teacher said, you were with Pai Cheng, which was another teacher, for 20 years and still have not got rid of your commonness. So I relate to Yu Yan. And yet, he planted that seed with Dongshan. And look what Dongshan did. So maybe one of you here will be another Dongshan. And we'll have our own tea ceremony coming up next in February toward the end of February. I was asked on Friday to meet with a group down at ZCLA called Facing Whiteness. And it's a group of folks and kind of their mission statement. They say that they're a circle of Zen practitioners who explore whiteness, white privilege, and racism in our identities and daily lives. Through reading, reflection, and discussion, we aim to expand our awareness of our own racial ignorance and learn to take meaningful anti-racist action. So they created this series of talks, and by the way, it's all women. So they created this series of talks inviting men that present themselves or identify as white male to have the discussion, to kind of lean into the discomfort, so to speak. And so I was invited, and then I was there with Sensei Muke. Sensei Dharma Joy was a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, it was really powerful, but I was really taken. They have a little chant that they do at the beginning of their meetings, and the very first part is it's called land acknowledgement. And so, as you know, we always recognize the indigenous peoples of our area. So I took that, I just wanted to share that, and I plugged in, instead of the Tongva people from LA, I put in our Northern Chumash people. I acknowledge the unceded territory of the Yakitutu Yaktahani, or Northern Chumash people, where I am living today. For hundreds of years, these indigenous peoples have been subjugated and genocided. I didn't know that that was a word, but that's in there. That's in their piece. Genocided by our white ancestors. Today, the Northern Chumash people continue to live throughout what we now call San Luis Obispo. And then, because it's this group where they're really studying racial injustice, they conclude with, we commit ourselves to dismantle the systems of white supremacy that dispossesses indigenous people of their lands and deny their rights to self-determination. So that's, I thought, really powerful, a powerful statement. I also I always look up some things or information about the Chumash and learn that it means bead maker or seashell people, being that they, were by the ocean, or originated near the ocean. And then the other thing that came up to me, and often does, is listening to my teacher, Roshi Gyoku. And she and Zen Peacemakers have done a lot of work with the Lakota tribe. And one of their words, the Lakota have a word for we are all related. It's Mita Koye Oyesi. We are all related. That's pretty Buddhist. So the theme for our practice period, as we all know, has been taking refuge in the three treasures. So Kanjo's talk last week was kind of honing in on the Dharma. Rinkai gave a talk a month ago that was kind of an overview of the three treasures, taking refuge in the three treasures. And then next month, Fukuwan will be focusing on Sangha. Today, I'm going to focus on taking refuge in the Buddha. And we're a little bit out of sequence here because I had to reschedule the talk I was supposed to have given. But these are all, they're not really out of sequence. They're all interconnected. Anyway, but my apologies for having to do that, and thank you for your understanding. The Buddha, taking refuge in the Buddha. Some of this will be academic. That's by design. We're supposed to be teaching Dharma information or sharing Dharma information. Some of you are more familiar with some of this than others. And looking at the Buddha, I was thinking, what a great time to be doing this. We just finished Shuatsu Sesshin, And we did it on the 7th, but December 8th in our tradition designates the awakening of the Buddha. And then coupled with that is what, October, I was in India, in the place where it is said Buddha had his awakening in Bodh Gaya. In our Jukai ceremony, now some of you may not even remember this because it's not things that you memorize, but it's the officiant, the preceptor, in part of their presentation. So they go through and we do an atonement. I think we do the chant the Heart Sutra or Maha. Yeah, I can't remember which one, but it's one of them that we chant. And then we have an atonement where we do the Gatha of Atonement. And then the preceptor says, now, having made atonement, you have purified your body, speech, and mind. This purification is due to the power of atonement. Next, you will reveal yourself as the 3 treasures, which have the 3 virtues and merits of the one body, 3 treasures, the realized 3 treasures, and the maintained 3 treasures. When once you reveal yourself as the 3 treasures, all virtues and merits will be in complete realization. So that's in your Jukai ceremony, whether you remember it or not. Then, also, when we do the head shaving ceremony, this is when somebody's going to receive Tokido and become a priest, ordained as a priest. During the head shaving ceremony, we chant together the instructions on the precepts, the Kyoju Kaima by Ehe Dogen. And as a group, we do this. So this goes through, I'm just going to share a few parts. The great precepts of the Buddha are maintained carefully by the Buddhas. Buddhas give them to Buddhas. Teachers transmit them to teachers. Receiving the precepts goes beyond the 3 times. Realization continues unceasingly from ancient times to the present. Our great master Shakyamuni Buddha transmitted the precepts to Mahakashapa, and Mahakashapa transmitted them to Ananda. Thus, they have been transmitted generation after generation. Before hearing Dogen's Zenji's instructions on the Bodhisattva precepts, let us recite the Gatha of Atonement. So there's the atonement again. And then after that, the 3 treasures have 3 merits and virtues called the one body 3 treasures, the realized 3 treasures, and the maintained 3 treasures. The Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is called the Buddha treasure. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. Does that sound familiar? It should to Derek and I. We were here in service during the Heart Sutra. It's one of the lines. With no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear. Far beyond deluded thoughts, this is nirvana. All past, present, and future Buddhas live prajna paramita and therefore attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. So Anuttara, that's supreme, highest, incomprehensible, unsurpassed. Samyak, right, true, correct, accurate, complete, and Sambodhi, enlightenment. And Dogen in this piece goes on to say, to realize and actualize the Bodhi is called the Buddha treasure of the realized 3 treasures. When one takes refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the great precepts of all Buddhas are obtained. Make enlightenment and compassion your teachers and do not follow misleading ways. And that's Dogen again. There's more. During your formal koan practice, toward the end of the practice, you approach the precepts as koans. And when we do that study, we use Yasutani Roshi's writings on the precepts. And I got to tell you, when I was doing this with Roshi Yoku, his explanation and language, the translation we were using was really difficult to decipher. And when you do this now, you're going in, they're koans. So you are going to go through into Dokusan with each one of the precepts as a koan, and you are expressing your understanding of how Bodhidharma looked at a particular koan, and Dogen Zenji, how he looked at that. So it's a little bit daunting, especially with a translation that isn't so great. Well, after I'd gone through that, just a few years ago, Roshi was with another teacher, Peter Levitt, and they cleaned it up. So it's I found a little bit more manageable nowadays. But again, he talks about the three bodies, or these same three elements, or three ways of looking at Buddha. But it gets even muddier. He says, this is Yasutani, here I will bring the Buddha down into the realm of thought and make some provisional explanations so as to aid beginners. But it should be clearly understood that one cannot get through Dokusan with theoretical explanations of this sort. And those of you doing koans know that that's true. To describe it further, it is the mysterious storehouse of the three virtues of Dharma, Prajna, and liberation. It is the three bodies of Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. So this is where it gets even muddier, because these are three other ways to speak of Buddha: the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. So just briefly, this is the Trikaya doctrine in Mahayana Buddhism. And it says that Buddha manifests in these three ways. So the Dharmakaya is the absolute, the unity of all things and beings, all phenomena unmanifested. And that's very similar to these other three that we'll be talking about. The Sambhogakaya is the body that feels the bliss of enlightenment. It's also a Buddha as an object of devotion. The Nirmanakaya is the physical body that is born, lives, and dies. That's going to be another talk because it's far too much information to look at. So it's going to be a part two, because it's really fascinating to see how these three relate to our lives and our own lives and our own psyche. But as I said, that's going to be another talk. So back to the three treasures with the three merits and virtues called the one body three treasures, the realized three treasures, and the maintained three treasures. Now, Rinkai touched upon this during his earlier talk, but I want to underscore it. And the reason is, I just gave you, it's in our practice. It's throughout our practice. And a lot of times people just kind of glaze over and don't pay attention to that. And remember that this taking refuge is actually part of our 16 Bodhisattva precepts. So they are both a vow and a precept. And you'll remember we do, I, Shōgen, take refuge in the Buddha. I vow to embody oneness, the awakened nature of all beings. So giving a little bit more, looking a little bit into what these are. The unified, in Japanese, it's Itai Sambo, which literally means one body, three treasures. And this is what the Buddha came to realize, the Itai Sambo. The manifested three treasures in Japanese, Genzen Sambo. And the third, abiding three treasures in Japanese, Juji Sambo. And that's interesting because During the Hosen, the officiant, which should either be at GCLA, it was usually Roshi Yoku, or when we do it here, it's me, it's whoever the officiant is. They're called the Juji, which means maintaining. So they are connected. The unified three treasures. So this is represented by Vairochana Buddha, which is supposed to be Muru, right? Emptiness, Vairochana. So when the preceptor is doing the service, he is actually, or she is manifesting as Vairochana during the service. This is representing the realization of the world of emptiness, of Buddha nature, of unconditioned equality. And as I said, that's Mu. The manifested three treasures, that's the historic Buddha, Shakyamuni, who through his perfect enlightenment realized himself the truth of this Itai Sambo, as I just said a moment ago. And then the abiding three treasures are the statues, the images that have come down to us throughout the ages. And again, I'm just focusing, these apply to the other three treasures as well, to the Dharma and to the Sangha. And of course, I'm focusing today on the Buddha. And these three treasures are mutually related and interdependent. So that's why it's okay if we get these out of sequence in our scheduling. So during my pilgrimage, I had the sense that it was a combination of the manifested and the abiding three treasures. The historical Buddha and the iconograph, how do you pronounce it?
Iconography.
Iconography, yeah, that comes down to us through the ages, because when you're over there, Buddha statues everywhere, and yet there you are, walking the ground of the historic Buddha. So there I was, walking in the footsteps of the Buddha, surrounded by the statues of his life, these pictures and images. And I say walking in the steps of the Buddha. And that's true for some of it. You were actually walking on the same grounds that he was walking on, and you in the ruins were the buildings where he lived and preached. But the reality is I was doing more driving in the steps of the Buddha than walking. And the reason is when you go on this pilgrimage, it's like 350 miles from east to west and 250 miles north to south. So it's a big area. He covered a lot of ground, and he would be walking across this area many, many times, often taking months. And we chant, those of you that have recently been down to Sesshin, you remember the Oryoki meal chant starts with Buddha was born in Kapilavatsu, enlightened in Magadha, taught in Varanasi, entered nirvana in Kushinagara. And when you're there, you don't take the trip chronologically. I think it's just because that most people don't, because of the time constraints and what's closer from one point to the other. So we flew from Delhi to Varanasi, that's where Sarnath is, or Deer Park. where Gautama Buddha first taught the Dharma, and where he did his first sermon. And this is where the original Sangha formed. Then it's a 7-hour drive from Varanasi to Saravasti. And this is where the Lord Buddha is said to spend his time attaining enlightenment. Time after attaining enlightenment. Then it's a 7-hour drive to Lumbini up in Nepal, where he was born, Kapilavastu, Buddha's birthplace. And keeping in mind, this wasn't all done in one day. So we're talking like 10 days. So some places we were staying a day or even 2 days or 3 days. Then after that, there's a 5-hour drive to Kushinagar, and that's where Buddha passed away. Another 5 hours to Rajir, and that's where the Buddha was offered a forest monastery by the king Bimbisara, and it became one of his most important teaching locations, and that's where the well-known Vulture Peak or Holy Eagle Peak is found, and it's located Mount Gudakutra. Now, many of you should know Mount Gudakutra. This is a 3-foot-long black snake. A long time ago, it had become a Kampura flower on Mount Gudakutra. That's from our Hosen, and you will hear that in February, recited again. And Buddha is said to have done a lot of his very, very famous sermons here, such as the Heart Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, and others. Then, just a side note, once we left Bodh Gaya, we drove to Gumla, Jharkhand, and that's another state in India, and that's where I joined with the Venerable Mujin Sunim, and we were off to look at the various projects there and in Bangladesh. So I really sense this blending, as I said, of the manifested and abiding three treasures, especially when I was sitting under the Bodhi tree, which is where Buddha is said to have had his enlightenment. Now, I have it on good authority. It's actually the 4th generation of a Bodhi tree. It's not the original one, but there I was. And sitting zazen. I actually went to the site at Bodh Gaya a number of times while we were there, but this one particular it was in the evening, and I was sitting like right across from the tree. And being the good Zen student, I was in my Zen posture with my eyes open but cast down. And it was just almost a surreal experience. And I realized, well, 2,500 years ago, it was sure a lot quieter. Because as I was sitting there gazing down, there were hundreds and hundreds of people walking by. So, and I wasn't, of course, looking up. All I saw were these feet going by. So it was, like I said, surreal. And it was the feeling, the sense of the historic Buddha in modern times. It was really, really powerful. Dogen Zenji has a fascicle from the Shobogenzo, which is called Taking Refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And this is interesting. I saw when I looked at a couple of different versions, and it's interesting. This particular one was not finished. It was a draft before he died. And then Ejo, his successor, finished it and printed it, or had it printed and posted like maybe a year or two after Dogen's death in 1253. He said the first of 100, this is from the Shobogenzo, the first of 120 questions in the guidelines for Zen monasteries says, do you revere Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha or not? Thus, it is clear that what the Buddhas and ancestors in India and China have authentically transmitted is reverence to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, Without taking refuge, there is no reverence. Without reverence, there is no taking refuge. And toward the end of it, you've heard me, I think, recite this before. You take refuge in Buddha because he is a great master. You take refuge in Dharma because it is good medicine. You take refuge in Sangha because it is an excellent friend. And then I went to see what the Buddha said about this. And this is another kind of a famous section. Buddha said, many of you are fearful of suffering and take refuge in mountains and gardens and forests, under trees or in shrines. Sounds like my kind of place. This refuge is neither excellent nor valuable. You cannot be liberated from suffering by taking refuge in them. On the other hand, if you take refuge in the Buddha, and if you take refuge in the Dharma and Sangha, you can always abide in the Four Noble Truths. With this wisdom, you always observe and understand suffering and the arising of suffering. You know how to go beyond suffering forever. You know the Eightfold Path. This refuge is the most excellent and most valuable of all. You will certainly become free from all suffering by taking this refuge. So are you free from suffering? Taking refuge. So what does this even mean? How does taking refuge help us navigate in this crazy world? Another war in the Middle East. Our country really kind of torn apart, polarized, mass shootings, mostly with assault weapons. This world of suffering. So what does it mean to you? When you look at the actual words, taking refuge, from the Pali, it's sarana gamana, sarana magana, gamana. So sarana means a shelter, protection, sanctuary, some place of peace and safety. Gamana, the act of returning. The Latin root of the word refuge, refugere, I think that's my pronunciation of Latin is probably horrific, but it means to fly back. So in this sense, it's meaning to fly back to our true home, our original nature. I did a post on one of the MailChimp posts, I think it was for this week, and it was from, and this is another name I'm going to just totally botch, Bodhin Johid from the Rochester Zen Center. When we say I take refuge in Buddha, what we're really saying, I place my faith in my own Buddha nature, not just the guy who lived in India. I will find as my source of spiritual sustenance, my own Buddha nature, my own enlightened nature. In our practice, then, we learn to be with what is right here, right now. We're being mindful. So I love that. Taking refuge in Buddha and recognizing our true home, and to return to it over and over and over again. The Buddha took refuge in Buddha, his own Buddha nature. Have you ever had in your practice the sense of arriving home? most of you have been with me for a while know, I tell the story of my first trip to ZCLA and going into the Zendo the first time. And in those days, we were facing the wall. We weren't facing out as we do now. And I was, those of you who've been there, as you're at the front and there's the altar, it was the street side of the Zendo, right by the back steps. And the first Zabuton at the bottom of the steps. And I can remember just being there and just being overwhelmed with emotions and just weeping. And it was that exact sense. I'm coming home. I've come home. So we are told that we are endowed with this Buddha nature. Do you know that to be true? Have you seen it? And we try to, or it's not just a matter of intellectually understanding this. We have to understand it with our bodies and practice it in our everyday life. And I love during our Jukai ceremony, when it's I think it's called recognition. So we all circle around one another. And we did it actually right in this room. Buddha recognizes Buddha, and Buddha bows to Buddha. Do you buy this? Me, a Buddha, with all my faults, my insecurities. Okay, maybe I have a little touch of some good qualities, but I have all these stories about myself, not being worthy. Are you perfect as you are? Yes. And when we take refuge, we're not trying to be something or someone else. We're being ourselves. So taking refuge in the Buddha means taking refuge in who you really are. And what you really are is already attained. Always. Every moment. What you really are is a Buddha. You don't have to work at it. Reb Anderson says part of what you are is what you think you are. But what you think you are is not all of what you are. It is just an aspect of what you are. So the Buddha had this existential dilemma, right? In his famous story where he bears witness to old age, sickness, and death. What's your existential dilemma? Sometimes I like to ask, what is your itch that needs scratching? What's brought you here? Tara Brach said, we're not humans on a spiritual path. We are awareness, awakening to discovering our true nature. Waking up to ourselves through this life. It's often said that these 16 Bodhisattva precepts boil down to one precept. I take refuge in the Buddha. And it said that if you really appreciate the meaning of I take refuge in the Buddha, then all the other precepts naturally flow from it. And in our practice, you can see that for discussion purposes, we hone in on different topics. For example, we have these 16 Bodhisattva precepts. We can go through each one of them. We have this manifested, the three treasures that we were just talking about, three ways of looking at that. And we're doing that for discussion's sake. But they are all entangled. Parada, you again have heard me say this a million times because he said it a million times. The idea of the relative and absolute, the phenomena on one side of the hand, the absolute on the other. And so we talk about each side, but it's one palm. What I found very powerful is that Dogen Zenji, the founder of our school, was, as you all know, a huge proponent of Zazen, that was the centerpiece. And yet, when he was dying, he wasn't sitting in Zazen. And I've heard many stories of teachers, maybe you have as well, that sat, their last moments, died sitting in Zazen. And Dogen didn't do that. Instead, he had 3 pieces of paper and he put the kanji for Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then was circumventing, because he put them on a post in his room, and he was circumventing that post. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. That's how important he saw it. And I'll end with Dogen in a short poem. He said, "It is present everywhere. There is nothing it does not contain. However, only those who have previously planted wisdom seeds will be able to continuously see." We have a little bit of time, not much. I'm always very long-winded, but it's because we're so slow to get started.
Really wish that you had a study guide along with this, all the words and terms, because there were so many places where I said, oh, I gotta remember that. Then there was something else. They're all gone.
They're all available.
Well, they're what?
They're all available.
They're all available. Yeah.
Okamura, Reb Anderson,
Yeah.
Norman Fisher.
Yeah.
They're at your fingertips.
All, but the terms and things that you
Yes.
used, yeah.
Yeah.
We could have it on.
What?
Huh?
Or just get a PDF.
Well, or, I mean, really, if one
They're
of the
all out there.
practical
Or-
things would just be to online to have a
Oh,
glossary.
Yeah.
I think it's more than just the definition, though. I mean, I think.
it is
Well,
like a book.
You put it in a context and connect
Yeah.
with that, which is really, really important. I thought of when you were talking about that you, instead of walking in the footsteps of the Buddha, you drove. I thought, well, Dharma wheel, Buddha must have foreseen it, rolling through this. Anyway, I thank you for your talk, because it was very, there was a lot of very good stuff in it and inspiring. And it brought it back to our practice, our personal practice, which I really appreciate. Thank you.
And you know, that's these Dharma talks, this is kind of what they're supposed to be, is that you're picking out Dharma themes or a topic, and then you're exploring them and looking to what the masters, what Buddha said, what the old masters have said, and then trying to pepper that with the modern teachers, modern day teachers, and then bringing it home in terms of like, what does that mean in your own life? Now, that's a Dharma talk. When you're a Roshi, Zen master, the Teisho is supposed to be just vomiting Dharma. Nonsensical.
Vomiting.
Just like calm.
How about embodying?
I'll get Japanese sir.
And it's brought up here, and when I was doing what little research I did on mine, I have a more of a appreciation of what's like the images and the statues as being reminders, is that those, I think, are things that we need on a practical level. And the idea of just when we're bowing to the Buddha, who are we bowing to? And that confusion, I think some people have that, what are you bowing to an image, or, and mistaking that.
Lots of resistance
And
to that
yeah,
by many people. And you realize, though, without that, things could have died out
right.
with the historical Buddha.
They didn't have images of Buddha for hundreds of years, so they
Right.
had the wheel and the footsteps.
Right.
That's it.
They
It's
had
a
the
tool.
stupas, they eight stupas where they divided up his cremains.
Yeah.
Boy, you see that, anyway, Carl and I are hoping to do kind of a whole presentation on this, because this wasn't just like the 4 or 5 major sites that we went to. You went like all over. It was incredible, the agenda that they had for this trip. And we were just so lucky. It was Carl and me, a guide, and a driver,
Wow.
and truly amazing.
So I guess I imagine it relates to when I was in Bhutan. I mean, the sense I had when I was in Bhutan and everybody I interacted with is that their life was inseparable to their practice. That, I mean, we had a number of guides, and that's, even though they were our guides and they took us along, that was inseparable to their beliefs and who they were as Buddhists.
Mhm.
It's so permeated their culture that there isn't, I mean, and this is an interesting thing, because in our culture we talk about separation of church and state or whatever, but I think in places like that there is no separation.
That's
And that's, you sense that, and that's something that I had never been to a place where you kind of, people are living, that. And I imagine that you kind of have that same sense.
Different parts. It was interesting because the guide was Hindu,
Mhm.
not a seriously practicing Hindu, but
Mhm.
but he was Hindu.
Yeah.
And so Buddhism was not his religion, but he was very. Of course, we were able to go back and forth. Angulimala, there's a stupa. You go, and he was like shocked that I knew all about Angulimala, because I think when he takes the groups, they don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's one of my favorites. So we were at the Angulimala stupa. But there was a difference. But you have a lot of people there, Sri Lankan monks. We stayed in a lot of Sri Lankan temples. Yeah, where it's the life. And back to your other point as well, is this is why even our Zafus, this is you're to treat everything as sacred. Luminous Heart, I don't know if any of you know Luminous Heart from ZCLA. She's up in San Francisco or Berkeley now. And she was kind of just throwing her software around, and Plum Hermit. And again, I don't think maybe you know, something, but he's there, he, you know, says, what are you doing? That's the Buddha's seat. So you take care. And we talk all the time about the temple treasures. Roshi told me the Oryoki, the Buddha bowl, you handle that as a sacred object. It's the Buddha.
But I'm sorry, but to me, that's a recognition of your own Buddha nature.
Exactly.
And by doing, when you just throw this, you're throwing your own Buddha nature, like, you know, when you don't treat it that way, then you're mistreating your own Buddha nature. And that's kind of a interesting idea, you know, it's just that constant reminder.
And as I say, yeah, we're coming back to this, our true nature over and over and over again. Because we're all deluded. Right. And what did Suzuki say? You know, that, yeah, we're all Buddhists, but we still have a little work to do.
You're perfect just as you are, but it doesn't mean you couldn't use a little improvement.
Yeah,
I love that.
Thank God he said that.
yeah, that's a kind of weird paradox. I mean, you can laugh, you kind of get it, but the more you try to explain it, the more it kind of falls apart for me, you know. Actually, I think in our I was just reading How to Cook Your Life.
Mhm.
And I think he touches on that kind of idea that, you know, there's room for improvement. I mean, he doesn't put it that way, but there's still the practice. There's still that you have to plan. You still have to do these.
That's why we continually practice our whole life.
Because the difference between some absolute understanding and our aspiration, you know, or I don't know how to say it, but it's our aspiration is we have to keep aspiring to embody it better and more thoroughly.
Anything else? We're past bewitching hour.
Thank you for your talk. I like there was a part in there that the embodying of the taking refuge, what came up for me, and that very end, like where that existential question you asked basically was, there was it came up for me was a feeling of safety, and time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost, and my experience of feeling what it is to take a refuge is I'm feeling safe. Because before I can do anything, I at least have to have my feet under me, or my butt under, you know, I feel safe enough to respond as opposed to just reacting. And that, so I've been practicing this for this practice period. What does it feel like to take a refuge? And through your talk, what came up to me was I said surrender and to put down my weapons being I'll figure this out like reality, so it starts working better until I can realize put that down, put those tools, weapons, toys down, and just start from a place of opening up and be myself. There was a lot that came with the talk, but look forward to seeing the replay of it on YouTube. And thank you.
Okay.
We do the 3 vows.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we're doing 3
Huh?
3 vows. Right?
Yeah, and then just do you know your part?
As soon as we start chanting.
Yeah, you'll do the 3 bows, and then this goes out first. This, and we'll slide this over, and then you're actually